Have you ever noticed that with some people, love feels easy for them to give, but respect feels almost impossible to earn? With an avoidant, that difference becomes everything. They can feel affection, they can feel attraction, they can even feel attachment. But real respect, that is rare, that is guarded, that is earned. And if you're here listening to this, there's a strong chance your character has quietly earned something far more powerful than temporary attention. You've earned real respect from the avoidant. And most people will never understand what that actually means. Because when it comes to someone who values independence like oxygen, who learned early in life that vulnerability equals danger, who survives by emotional distance rather than emotional dependency, respect is not handed out casually. It is measured, observed, tested, and only given to those who demonstrate strength without aggression, confidence without control, and presence without pressure. So if you've sensed a shift, if you felt that something changed in the way they look at you, speak to you, or respond to you, this is not in your imagination. Respect changes everything in the world of an avoidant. And you didn't earn it by chasing. You didn't earn it by pleading. You earned it by who you are when things got uncomfortable. You need to understand something first. Avoidants do not hand out respect easily because respect to them is deeply tied to survival. Somewhere in their past, closeness felt overwhelming. Emotional demands felt suffocating. Depending on someone felt unsafe. So they built independence not just as a preference, but as a shield. And when someone approaches them with too much emotional urgency, too much need for reassurance, too much intensity, their instinct isn't admiration, it's retreat. They respect stability. They respect emotional self-control. They respect someone who does not crumble the moment. Distance appears. That doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. In fact, they often feel more than they show, but they were trained consciously or unconsciously to prioritize control over connection. So when they meet someone who is calm under pressure, someone who doesn't weaponize emotions, someone who doesn't make closeness feel like a trap, it disrupts their entire internal system. They start watching more carefully. They start analyzing differently because strength without dominance is rare. And when they see it, they don't ignore it. They take note. One of the first moments your character began to earn their respect was when you didn't chase. Most people chase an avoidant. It's almost predictable. The avoidant pulls back and the other person leans forward harder. The avoidant becomes distant and the other person floods them with texts, explanations, emotional appeals. But you didn't do that. Maybe you felt the urge. Maybe you wanted clarity. Maybe you wanted reassurance. But instead of collapsing into pursuit, you held yourself together. You allowed space to exist. You allowed silence to breathe, and that changed everything because when someone doesn't chase them, it forces them to confront something unfamiliar. It forces them to wonder. It creates curiosity instead of comfort. And curiosity is powerful. When you didn't run after them, they realized you were not driven by fear of losing them. You were grounded in yourself. That alone speaks volumes to an avoidant. It signals that your interest is not desperation. It signals that your presence is a choice, not a dependency. And in their internal world, that is the first spark of respect. Then there was the moment they pulled away, and instead of reacting emotionally, you stayed calm. That might have been one of the most defining points in this entire dynamic because avoidants expect emotional backlash. They expect guilt. They expect pressure. They expect dramatic reactions when they create distance. It's what they've seen before. It's what they prepare for. But when you didn't explode, when you didn't accuse, when you didn't spiral into panic, it disarmed them. Your emotional regulation did something subtle but profound. It made you safe, not safe in a weak way, safe in a stable way. There's a difference. You showed that you can handle discomfort without turning it into chaos. You showed that you don't need immediate reassurance to maintain your identity. And that kind of emotional steadiness is deeply respected by someone who fears emotional overwhelm. They may not have said anything in that moment. They may have even acted indifferent, but internally something shifted because they realized you are not fragile. You are not easily shaken. You are not someone they can destabilize simply by withdrawing, and that realization plants respect deep in their mind. Another reason your character earned their respect is because you didn't try to fix them. This is huge. So many people enter relationships with the silent belief that they can heal, rescue, or transform the avoidant. They point out emotional blind spots. They push for vulnerability. They try to break down walls, but you didn't treat them like a project. You didn't approach them as something broken that needed repair. You allowed them to exist as they are. That doesn't mean you tolerated disrespect. It means you didn't make their personality your mission. That subtle difference matters. When someone feels like they are being analyzed or corrected, their defenses go up. But when someone simply observes without judgment, when someone accepts without forcing change, it lowers their guard. And here's the truth. Most people don't understand. Avoidants are already aware of their patterns. They know they pull away. They know they struggle with closeness. They know they detach when things get intense. What they don't respect is being cornered about it. What they do respect is someone who sees it and still stands strong without trying to control it. Your restraint showed maturity, it showed self-respect, and that makes them look at you differently. And maybe one of the most powerful reasons you've earned their real respect is because you have your own life. You don't revolve around them. You don't pause your growth waiting for their emotional availability. You have goals, you have routines, you have interests that exist beyond this connection, and that independence mirrors something they deeply value. But here's the difference. Your independence is healthy. It's not built on avoidance. It's built on wholeness. You don't withdraw to escape. You live fully because you're grounded. And when they see that you are not orbiting around them, when they realize your world does not collapse if they step back, it commands admiration. Avoidants respect autonomy. They respect someone who stands alone confidently. And when they encounter someone who can connect without clinging, who can love without losing themselves, who can step back without bitterness, it challenges their assumptions about relationships. It makes them reconsider what closeness could actually look like. You become someone they cannot categorize easily. You are neither overly dependent nor emotionally unavailable. You are balanced, and balance is rare. So if you've been questioning whether your steadiness mattered, whether your calm response made a difference, whether your independence was noticed, understand this clearly. It was respect in the avoidant world is quiet. It doesn't come with loud declarations. It doesn't come with dramatic confessions. It shows up in subtle shifts in the way they start listening more carefully, in the way they hesitate before pulling away again, in the way they consider your perspective instead of dismissing it. Respect builds slowly, like trust, like foundation, and your character laid that foundation, not by force, not by persuasion, but by consistency. And the most powerful part, you didn't have to become someone else to earn it. You didn't manipulate. You didn't perform. You stayed aligned with your values. That is strength. And whether this connection grows or not, whether it deepens or changes form, the truth remains the same. Real respect from an avoidant is not accidental. It is earned through emotional maturity, self-control, and unwavering identity. And you showed all of it. And because you stayed aligned with your values, something else happened that you may not have even realized at the time. You set boundaries without drama, not the kind of boundaries that come with threats, not the kind that are wrapped in ultimatums, but calm, grounded standards. You communicated what felt right and what didn't without turning it into a battlefield, and that is where respect deepens. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to control. The moment they feel trapped, cornered, or emotionally forced, they detach. But when you expressed your limits with composure, when you didn't shout them or weaponize them, it signaled something powerful. It showed that you respect yourself enough to protect your peace, and you respect them enough not to humiliate them in the process. That balance is rare. Many people swing between silence and explosion. You didn't. You stayed steady, and that steadiness creates gravity. They may not have reacted strongly in the moment. They may have appeared unaffected, but internally they registered it, because someone who can say, "This is what I deserve," without aggression is someone who cannot be easily manipulated or dismissed. That commands admiration. And then there were moments when confusion hit you. Moments when their mixed signals left you wondering where you stood. Moments when the silence felt heavy. You could have begged for reassurance. You could have demanded clarity over and over again. You could have let anxiety drive your behavior. But you didn't collapse into desperation. You felt your emotions. Yes, you questioned things privately. Yes, but outwardly you maintained dignity. You didn't make them responsible for regulating your insecurities. And that's something avoidants notice more than they ever admit. They are used to being pulled into emotional storms. They are used to people leaning on them for constant validation, which often overwhelms them. But when you handled uncertainty with restraint, it changed the dynamic. It told them that you are not dependent on their every word to feel secure. You are not measuring your worth by their level of availability. That kind of inner stability creates respect because it removes pressure. And when pressure disappears, curiosity grows. They begin to lean in not because they are forced to, but because they want to understand you better. You also did something most people fail to do. You understood silence. Silence can feel terrifying when you care about someone. It can feel like rejection, like abandonment, like a quiet confirmation that you are not enough. But instead of interpreting every pause as proof of disinterest, you allowed space to exist without immediately filling it. That doesn't mean you were emotionless. It means you chose not to react impulsively. Avoidants use space as a coping mechanism. It's how they regulate their nervous system. And when someone reacts to that space with panic, it reinforces their fear that closeness equals chaos. But when you allowed silence without attacking it, it sent a different message. It told them that you are not afraid of distance, that you trust yourself enough not to spiral, that you understand that breathing room is not always betrayal, and that understanding makes them feel less defensive around you. It lowers their guard in ways that confrontation never could. Silence, when handled with strength, becomes a bridge instead of a wall. There was also a subtle power shift in the way you refused to compete for control. Many relationships with avoidance turn into silent battles. Who cares less? Who pulls away first? Who maintains the upper hand? But you didn't engage in that game. You didn't try to dominate emotionally. You didn't withhold affection as punishment. You didn't play cold to provoke reaction. You stayed authentic. That authenticity disrupts the usual dynamic. Avoidants are familiar with power struggles. They are comfortable in dynamics where emotional distance equals leverage. But when someone refuses to participate in control tactics, it creates unfamiliar territory. You showed connection without surrendering autonomy. You showed warmth without submission. You showed interest without obsession. And that balance unsettles their usual strategy in the best way possible, because suddenly they can't categorize you as clingy or controlling. They can't predict you using old patterns. You become steady instead of reactive, and steady people are difficult to dismiss. One of the deepest reasons respect has formed is because you saw through them, but you didn't expose them. You noticed the patterns. You recognized the fear behind the withdrawal. You sensed the vulnerability behind the emotional distance, but you didn't use that insight to shame them. You didn't throw their wounds in their face during disagreements. You didn't weaponize their insecurities. Instead, you held that awareness with quiet understanding. That creates psychological safety. And psychological safety is something avoidants rarely experience. Many people, once they understand the avoidance fears, use that knowledge to push harder, to demand change, to force confrontation. But you didn't corner them with what you knew. You allowed them to reveal themselves at their own pace. And that patience is powerful. It tells them that you are not trying to win against them. You are trying to understand them. There's a difference, and that difference builds trust slowly, almost invisibly. And even though you were understanding, you didn't abandon accountability. This is important. You didn't excuse disrespect just because you understood their background. You didn't justify poor behavior endlessly. When something crossed a line, you addressed it. But you addressed it calmly. You didn't explode. You didn't insult. You didn't escalate. You stated your feelings clearly and directly. That kind of communication requires emotional intelligence, avoidance, respect, logic, and composure. When feedback comes wrapped in chaos, they shut down. But when it comes wrapped in clarity, they listen more than they show. By holding them accountable without attacking their character, you demonstrated strength. You showed that you are compassionate but not naive, understanding but not weak. That balance is rare, and rare things are respected. All of these moments taken together have created something deeper than attraction. They have created admiration, and admiration changes the internal dialogue of an avoidant. They may still need space sometimes. They may still retreat when overwhelmed. But now when they think about you, it's different. You are not just someone who desires them. You are someone who stands on equal ground, someone whose presence feels steady rather than demanding, someone whose absence would not be chaotic but significant. And significance is powerful because avoidance may detach from intense emotion. But detaching from someone they respect feels heavier. It lingers. It echoes. It creates reflection instead of relief. If you've ever felt unsure whether your calmness mattered, whether your boundaries were noticed, whether your silence spoke louder than confrontation, let this settle into you now. It did. Respect doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly in the shift of perception, in the way they start choosing their words more carefully around you, in the way they hesitate before disappearing for too long, in the way they slowly open small doors instead of building higher walls. It is subtle, but it is real. And here's the deeper truth that you need to hear. You didn't earn this respect by shrinking. You didn't earn it by tolerating less than you deserve. You earned it by staying whole. By refusing to let someone else's emotional patterns dictate your self-worth, by loving without losing yourself. That is strength. And whether this connection evolves into something long-term or teaches you something transformative, the respect you've earned is a reflection of your character, not their approval. You stood firm in who you are. And in the world of someone who values independence above almost everything that is not just attractive, it is unforgettable. And because you stayed whole and true to yourself, the next layer of respect emerged in a way that is almost invisible to the casual observer, but impossible for them to ignore internally. You didn't just hold boundaries and maintain independence. You also allowed them to walk away calmly at times without chasing or pressuring. This is perhaps one of the hardest things to do when someone matters to you. When they pulled back or created distance, you didn't panic. You didn't flood their inbox with questions. You didn't spiral into self-doubt or guilt. Instead, you held your ground. You showed that your life, your emotions, and your peace were not dictated by their every move. And in the world of an avoidant that sends an almost unspoken message, you are not easily shaken, not easily manipulated, not dependent on their validation. That kind of strength is magnetic in a way that love alone cannot create. They notice it because they can't manufacture it themselves. They notice it because it threatens the usual patterns they've experienced. Patterns of people chasing, people pleading, people bending themselves out of fear of losing them. You became someone whose presence mattered but whose absence could be tolerated. That balance is rare and it changes everything. The way you responded to their tests also mattered more than you probably realized. Avoidants often test respect quietly. They pull back, they withhold, they act distant. Not to punish, but to see if you crumble. If your character falters, if your confidence wavers, if your emotions spike, they get reinforced in their belief that closeness is dangerous and that people cannot be trusted. But you didn't give them that reinforcement. You stayed measured, thoughtful, and calm, even when it was hard. That's not just patience. That's emotional strength that feels almost foreign to them. Over time, repeated tests like this aren't forgotten. They accumulate. Each time you responded with steadiness rather than desperation, each time you maintained your dignity instead of reacting with fear or anger, your respect tally increased silently in their mind. They start to notice patterns. They start to think differently. They begin to realize that this is not someone who will be moved or manipulated easily, but someone who remains anchored in themselves regardless of the shifting tides around them. And in their world, that is golden, that is rare, that is unforgettable. Another reason they began to see you differently is because you understood the real difference between attachment and respect. Many people confuse affection, attention, or proximity with genuine connection, but you showed something different. You didn't chase attachment. You didn't overinvest in reactions or validation. You simply acted from a place of grounded character. And that is something avoidants noticed because it's uncommon. They are used to people who will bend themselves into knots to maintain closeness. People who will tolerate inconsistency, people who will behave in ways that signal insecurity. But when someone demonstrates strength through emotional stability, it disrupts their usual expectations. They begin to recognize that your presence is a choice, not a need. That is deeply impressive to someone who measures closeness carefully and fears dependency. Your character, in essence, became proof that intimacy doesn't have to feel like chaos. It can feel steady. It can feel grounded and it can exist without suffocating them. That realization alone creates layers of admiration and respect that most people never achieve. You also earned their respect by maintaining your own life even in moments when connection with them felt uncertain. Many people in this dynamic make the mistake of pausing their personal growth, of slowing their dreams, of shrinking their world just to accommodate someone who is inconsistent. But you didn't. You pursued your ambitions. You nurtured your routines. You surrounded yourself with the things that brought fulfillment outside of their presence. And that demonstrates something avoidants value deeply: autonomy paired with integrity. You didn't use your independence to punish them or make them jealous. You used it because that is who you are. That subtle distinction matters because it signals confidence and self-respect. It signals that your emotional well-being is not contingent on them showing up perfectly. And in doing so, you became a person they could respect without even realizing why. Independence that is authentic is magnetic. It creates curiosity, it invites consideration, and most importantly, it makes them feel safe to engage because they are not expected to fill an emptiness in you. They are simply being invited to connect with someone whole. Finally, by this point, your steady presence, your patience, your restraint, and your autonomy have created a fundamental shift in the way they relate to you. The dynamic is no longer about pursuit and retreat. It's about mutual recognition. They see that you are strong yet compassionate, confident yet approachable, independent yet capable of closeness without pressure. And that combination is a paradox in the world of an avoidant, a puzzle they both admire and respect. You became someone they can look at and trust implicitly, not because of grand gestures, not because of forced vulnerability, but because of the quiet consistency of your character. They may still test. They may still retreat occasionally. They may still have moments of doubt, but the internal acknowledgement of your steadiness, your dignity, and your self-respect has planted a deep sense of admiration. That admiration becomes the foundation for every interaction moving forward. And while they may never vocalize it fully, the subtle shift in their behavior, listening more carefully, seeking your perspective, adjusting their distance thoughtfully, is proof that your character has genuinely earned real respect. By now, you may be realizing that earning respect from someone who is avoidant isn't about effort in the conventional sense. It's not about impressing them with words, gifts, or dramatic actions. It's about who you are when they are not paying attention. It's about how you hold yourself when distance appears, when confusion strikes, when tests come without warning. It's about the quiet way you maintain boundaries, honor your independence, and regulate your own emotions without expecting them to do it for you. It's about letting silence exist without panic, letting space breathe without fear, and showing that love and connection can coexist with personal wholeness. That is the essence of real respect. That is the essence of character. And in a world where many people lose themselves trying to gain approval, you have done something rare. You have earned a place of honor in their internal world, not through manipulation, not through strategy, but through authenticity, patience, and unwavering alignment with yourself. And that is why this respect is more significant than any affection, any attraction, or any fleeting attachment you may have experienced. Because respect is durable. Respect is quiet but foundational. Respect survives distance, survives conflict, survives inconsistency. And when someone who is avoidant respects you, it signals something profound. They see you not as a project, not as a dependent, not as someone to be controlled or tested endlessly, but as a person of integrity, strength, and calm presence. That is not something that can be forced. That is not something that can be faked. It is a reflection of who you are, how you navigate challenges, and how you carry yourself in the face of emotional complexity. And you've done that. You've become someone they can consider equal, someone they cannot manipulate with fear or guilt, someone whose presence is both safe and significant. And that more than anything else is what real respect from an avoidant feels like. Whether this relationship continues, evolves, or even fades, the respect you have earned is yours permanently. It is not a temporary acknowledgement. It is the result of consistency, emotional intelligence, and the courage to maintain yourself fully in the presence of someone whose defenses are naturally high. That respect is now woven into the way they think about you, the way they interact with you, and the way they perceive closeness. They may never say it outright, they may never articulate it, but they know it, they feel it, and every choice, every pause, every reconsideration on their part now carries the weight of your quiet but undeniable integrity. This is the kind of respect that transforms the dynamic entirely. It no longer becomes a game of chase. It no longer becomes a cycle of withdrawal and anxiety. Instead, it becomes a space where your character sets the tone, where your calmness creates stability, where your boundaries create clarity, and where your independence creates intrigue. You have become a presence they cannot take lightly. They may test, they may probe, they may pull away, but every time they do, they encounter the same steady force you carry within yourself. And that force commands acknowledgement, it commands reflection, it commands respect. And in the end, that is the real reward. Not simply being liked, not simply being wanted, but being recognized for the depth of your character in a way that is lasting and meaningful, even to someone who is naturally guarded, independent, and hard to impress. Respect in this context is both a shield and a bridge. It protects your emotional well-being because it establishes a standard that cannot easily be violated. It also creates a bridge because it opens the door for a connection that is more authentic, more grounded, and more sustainable than superficial attraction or fleeting attachment. The respect you've earned changes the energy of every interaction. It shifts the unspoken rules. It communicates that you are not a victim of circumstance or emotion, but a conscious participant in connection. And that clarity, strength, and consistency is exactly what an avoidant notices, internalizes, and admires above almost anything else. You have not just survived interactions with someone difficult to impress. You have thrived in them. You have shown that character, calmness, and clarity are more compelling than drama, desperation, or manipulation. You have demonstrated that emotional maturity is magnetic,